Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're heading to Glacial Lake State Park in Minnesota.
Sounds fun.
It does, right? Our focus for today is the High Peak Trail. And we've gone through a whole bunch of different sources, trail guides and park websites, even some personal blogs to try to get like a real feel for this place.
You know, it's really interesting. You know, we often think of Minnesota with all the forests and the lakes and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Glacial Lake State Park is a little bit different. It's kind of like this remnant of what used to be like this vast prairie landscape.
Yeah, it's a different kind of beauty, right?
Absolutely.
So to get us started, can you give us just like a quick overview of Glacial Lake State Park itself? Like, where is it? What's it all about?
Yeah. So Glacial Lake State Park, it's about 5 miles south of Starbuck, Minnesota.
Okay.
And it was established in 1963. And they really wanted to protect this rolling prairie landscape that was formed thousands of years ago by the Wisconsin glaciation.
Yeah.
So you have these kettle lakes, you know, where the glaciers melted.
Right.
And you get these really picturesque rolling hills that were kind of carved out by the glaciers.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. But you had mentioned earlier that the park is maybe a little bit of a hidden gem.
Yeah. So All Trails actually ranks it as number 43 out of 76 state parks in Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
So it's, you know, not quite at the top, but the people who've been there really, really love it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely got something special going for it.
Okay. Well, and that kind of leads us right into our main focus, the High Peak Trail. What makes it so special? Why do hikers love it so much? What's going on with this trail?
So High Peak Trail, it's the most popular trail in the park.
Okay.
It's got a little something for everybody, from like casual walkers to, you know, people who are a little bit more seasoned. There's actually 2 versions of the trail. The standard High Peak Trail is about 3 miles.
Okay.
And then there's the hiking club version, which is about 3.5 miles.
Okay. The hiking club version, what is that?
Yeah, so the hiking club version is really cool. It's actually run by the Minnesota DNR, and it's really to encourage people to get out and explore the parks, especially families.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so as you hike the hiking club version of a trail, you'll see these posts, and they have passwords on them. And if you collect all the passwords, then you get all these cool benefits, even free camping nights.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a really fun way to get the whole family involved.
Yeah, kids love that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's paint a picture for our listener.
Yeah.
Imagine that we're starting out on this High Peak Trail. What's it going to be like? What are we going to see along the way?
Well, you start out at the edge of Signalness Lake. It's the biggest lake in the park.
All right.
And from there, the trail kind of meanders through these beautiful prairie grasslands.
Okay.
And it slowly starts to climb up to the highest point in the park.
Okay.
And along the way, you'll see, you know, maybe some little ponds and stuff like that.
All right. All right. So we make it to the top. What's up there?
Oh, the view from up there is breathtaking.
Really?
You can see for miles.
Oh, wow.
You see ponds and prairie and even farmland way off in the distance.
Nice.
It's really, really beautiful. It gives you a good sense of all the different landscapes in Minnesota.
So, speaking of prairie, I've always been fascinated by it. But it seems like it would be pretty simple, right? Just grass. But I hear that prairies are actually incredibly diverse ecosystems.
Yeah. They're actually the second most diverse ecosystem in the world.
What?
Second only to the rainforest.
Wow.
So they're more diverse than a jungle.
Really?
It's pretty amazing.
What makes them so diverse?
Well, it's all about the conditions in the prairie. You'll have areas with full sun, areas with shade, dry soil, wetter areas. So you have all these little microhabitats kind of existing side by side.
Oh, so that's what makes all the different plants and animals.
Exactly. It's all about adaptability and resilience.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
And you get to see all this diversity when you hike the High Peak Trail. You'll see grasses like King Bluestem and Little Bluestem. Maybe you'll see some prairie clover. You might even stumble across a prickly pear cactus.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is pretty cool. It shows how adaptable the prairie is.
That is really cool. And I bet the wildflowers are pretty amazing, too.
Oh, they're spectacular.
Yeah.
Depending on when you go, you might see pasque flowers in the spring, or coneflowers and goldenrods in the summer.
Wow.
And even later in the year, you might see rose shrubs and wolfberry.
So there's always something in bloom.
Yeah. It's a feast for the eyes, pretty much year-round.
Okay, so we've talked about plants. What about animals? What kind of animals are we going to see out on this trail?
So Glacial Lakes State Park sits right in that sweet spot between the prairie and the hardwood forest.
Okay.
So you get species from both habitats.
Oh, cool.
You'll see your squirrels and deer, pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
You might see signs of beavers down by the lake.
Yeah.
Maybe hear a wood duck. And if you're really lucky, you might even see a coyote.
Ooh. That'd be pretty cool.
It would.
So it seems like this trail is packed with stuff.
Oh, it is.
It's not that long,
Right.
but there's just tons to see. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some other things that people can do at Glacial Lake State Park besides just hiking.
Sure.
What else is there to do?
So you mentioned earlier the trail starts at Signalness Lake.
Right.
The largest one in the park. There's a ton to do on the lake. Swimming, fishing, boating.
Oh, nice.
Although it's electric motors only
Oh, okay.
to protect the environment.
Gotcha.
And you can go canoeing, kayaking, paddle boarding.
Wow. A lot of options.
And they even have rentals if you don't have your own equipment.
That's awesome. So you can have a relaxing day on the lake. You can have this adventurous hike.
Yeah, a little something for everybody.
It's awesome. What about staying overnight?
Yes.
Can people do that?
Absolutely. They have tent camping, and they also have these cute little cabins.
Oh, nice.
So you can really get that immersive experience with nature.
So you can fall asleep under the stars.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Speaking of stars, I think I read somewhere that Glacial Lakes is a really good place for stargazing.
It is. Because it's so remote and there's minimal light pollution,
Oh, wow.
it's an ideal place to just look up at the night sky.
That's awesome. It seems like Glacial Lake State Park has got a little something for everybody.
It really does.
But before we get carried away and we're planning our whole trip, let's talk about some tips for actually hiking the High Peak Trail. What do people need to know?
Okay. Well, first things first, timing is key. Spring and autumn are generally the best time to go.
Okay.
The weather's great for hiking, and that's when the wildflowers are really popping.
Yeah, that makes sense. Minnesota summers can get pretty hot and buggy.
That's right. Which leads me to my second tip.
Okay.
Pack that bug spray.
Oh, yeah.
The prairie insects are no joke.
Oh, I bet. And I imagine you probably want to bring a lot of water too, right?
Right.
Especially if it's hot out.
Absolutely. There's very limited access to water once you leave the campground.
Okay, good to know. So any other insider tips? Like what about parking? Is that difficult?
Yeah, parking can be a bit of a challenge on the weekends, especially during peak season. So try to get there early. Or if you're with a group, you can carpool.
Okay, that's great advice. So best time to visit, what to pack, parking tips. Got it. Now I want to turn to our listener. What stood out to you so far about Glacial Lakes State Park and the High Peak Trail? What are you curious about? What do you want to learn more about? Take a second and think about it. We'll be right back with more after a quick break. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're still talking about Glacial Lake State Park and the High Peak Trail. Before the break, we were talking about the landscape and all the plants and animals and stuff.
Yeah.
But what really gets me is it's not just like a physical journey when you're on this trail. It's almost like you're walking through time, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's the human history of this area? Like, what's the connection between people and the prairie?
So way before Glacial Lake State Park was even a thing, indigenous peoples used the prairie for everything. It was a really spiritual place for them. And tribes like the Dakota and the Ojibwe, they would use the plants for food and medicine.
So they were really connected to the prairie. It was a huge part of their lives.
Absolutely. And their traditions and knowledge are really intertwined with the prairie.
It's like we're not just visitors. We're part of this really long history.
Exactly.
Do you think there are any stories or traditions that have been passed down through generations that connect people to this specific place?
Oh, I'm sure there are. But unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge has been lost over time, because of colonization.
Yeah.
But there are people working to bring those traditions back and recognize how important the indigenous perspective is for understanding the prairie.
That's really important work. So when we're hiking the High Peak Trail, it's not just about the scenery.
Right.
It's about the human history too, right?
Right. And remember those amazing views from the highest point. Imagine seeing those views through the eyes of someone who's called this land home for centuries.
Wow.
It would be a whole different experience, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have a much deeper meaning. It makes you think about how our own experiences shape the way we see things.
One thing that people don't always realize is that fire is a really important part of the prairie.
Oh, yeah.
Indigenous people would use controlled burns to manage the prairie. It actually helped to promote biodiversity and prevent too many trees from growing.
Oh, wow. So what we think of as this untouched wilderness has actually been shaped by people for a long time.
Exactly. And it shows how much we can learn from traditional ecological knowledge.
That's a great point. So as we're hiking the High Peak Trail, We need to remember that we're walking through a landscape that has been shaped by both nature and people.
Absolutely.
So I know we talked about some general tips for visiting the park, but do you have any advice for hiking the High Peak Trail specifically?
Well, one thing that's special about the High Peak Trail is that it has a lot of different types of terrain.
Okay. You'll be walking through open prairie, but also some wooded areas.
So what should people keep in mind when they're hiking through those different areas?
Be prepared for anything. The prairie can be really sunny, so bring a hat and sunscreen.
Right.
And the wooded areas can be slippery after it rains.
Okay, good to know.
So wear sturdy shoes.
And what about animals? Are there any animals that we should be aware of in the woods?
You know, the High Peak Trail isn't known for dangerous animals, but always be aware of your surroundings.
Right.
Ticks can be a problem in the woods, so wear long pants and use bug spray.
Got it.
And, of course, always give wildlife their space.
Good advice. We've talked about the physical stuff and the cultural stuff, but what about the senses? What does it sound like? What does it smell like when you're on this trail?
The High Peak Trail is a sensory experience. When it's windy, you can hear the grass rustling.
Okay.
And when it's quiet, you might hear a meadowlark or crickets.
Oh, wow.
And when you're walking through the wildflowers, the air just smells amazing.
It sounds so peaceful. It really is. It's a great way to escape the city and just reconnect with nature.
You had mentioned earlier that the High Peak Trail is like a walk-through time. Are there any signs of that history that we can actually see when we're hiking?
Yeah. Keep an eye out for those kettle lakes.
Okay.
They're a reminder of the glaciers that were here thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
You might also see glacial erratics.
What are those?
They're these giant boulders that were carried by the glaciers. They look like they don't belong there at all.
Oh, wow.
Almost like they were dropped from the sky.
That's really cool. What about signs of human history?
Well, the High Peak Trail itself doesn't have any marked historical sites, but the area is full of archaeological stuff.
Really?
Like burial mounds and artifacts.
Wow. So we're really walking through layers of history when we're on this trail.
Exactly. Every place has a story, and it's up to us to discover it.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are you thinking about? What has really stood out to you about the High Peak Trail? What are you most excited to experience? Think about it. We'll be back with the final part of our exploration in a minute. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking all about Glacial Lake State Park and the High Peak Trail. And, you know, one of the things that we keep coming back to is the park's really unique history, like all those glaciers and stuff.
Yeah, it's like a giant outdoor museum showcasing all the forces that shape the landscape.
So can you give us like a Geology 101 crash course on the park? Like, what are some of the key things that make it so unique?
Well, going back, about 10,000 years ago to the end of the last glacial period,
Okay.
Minnesota was actually covered by these massive ice sheets that were thousands of feet thick.
Really?
Yeah, and as they moved and melted, they carved out the land.
We've talked about kettle lakes. Those are pretty cool. And those were formed by melting glaciers. What about the rolling hills? Like on the High Peak Trail, did those come from the glaciers too?
They did. The weight of the ice actually pushed and molded the earth, creating that rolling terrain.
It's amazing to think about, the power of those glaciers.
It really is.
So, besides the kettle lakes, are there any other signs of the glaciers that we might see when we're hiking?
Oh, definitely. Keep an eye out for glacial erratics.
Glacial erratics, what are those?
So those are large boulders that were carried by the glaciers, and as the ice melted, they were just kind of left behind.
Oh, wow.
So you'll see them just kind of scattered around the prairie.
That's so cool. So we've got the lakes and the hills and these erratics. Did the glaciers also affect the soil?
Yeah, absolutely. The glaciers left behind a mix of clay, sand, and gravel. It's called glacial till.
Okay.
And that formed the base for the soil that you see today.
So those glaciers really set the stage for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, the glaciers are a big part of it, but the bedrock under the park is also really important.
Okay, the bedrock. What about it?
Glacial Lakes State Park sits on a bed of granite and gneiss.
Okay.
And these are super hard rocks.
Okay.
So over millions of years, they've been weathered and eroded, but they erode really slowly.
So that's why we see those rocky outcrops on the trail.
Exactly. They add a lot of character to the landscape.
I remember reading something about the leaf mountains and how the park is part of that.
Oh yeah, the Leaf Mountains. Those are pretty cool.
What are they?
So they're not like huge mountains.
Yep.
They're more like a series of rolling hills and ridges.
Okay.
And they actually predate the glaciers.
Really?
Yeah, they were formed millions of years ago by something called uplift.
Uplift.
Yeah, it's where forces inside the earth push the land upwards.
Oh, wow. Okay, and then the glaciers came along later and kind of smoothed them out.
Exactly. So you've got these really old mountains that were shaped by the glaciers, and that's what gives us the landscape we see today.
It's like this multi-layered history.
It really is. And it's still changing, even today.
Yeah, the Earth is always moving and changing.
Right.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it. All those forces that have shaped Glacial Lake State Park over millions of years.
It makes you realize how small we are,
Yeah, it really does. And how special this place is.
Absolutely. So next time you're on the High Peak Trail, take a moment to really look around and appreciate everything that went into creating it.
I think that's a great takeaway. Glacial Lake State Park is a place where you can experience the beauty of nature, but also connect with history and geology all at the same time. It's pretty amazing.
It's a reminder that there's always something more to discover if you just take the time to look.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Glacial Lake State Park and the High Peak Trail. We hope you learned something new and maybe even feel inspired to go out and explore it yourself.
Happy hiking!
Until next time.